Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the NABJ Global Journalism Task Force International Forum and Reception. I'm Rochelle Riley. I'm the co-chair of the task force, along with Jeffrey Ballou of Al Jazeera, who unfortunately is tied up in Washington, D.C., although he just sent me a text saying he's trying to get on an 8:30 flight. He'll be late for this, but I guess he's still going to come. We are so thrilled that you're here because the world is a small place, and people tend to forget that sometimes when they think that the things that are going on, thousands of miles away don't apply to us or don't affect us. And it's our job to make sure that people understand that, yes, they do. We are thrilled to have as our sponsor General Motors. Their representatives are here, but they're also sponsoring the 5K. So they're over there checking out the site. But when they do arrive, we'd like to acknowledge them and thank them for their money. I would now like to introduce Damaso Reyes of Barcelona, who is our moderator. He will tell you about himself and introduce the panelists. And I will talk to you again at the end in time for food and drink. Again, I'm Rochelle Riley, and thank you so much.
Good afternoon. Thank you guys so much for coming here and for taking some time out of your busy convention schedule. I trust that you guys have read the program and can read our bios. I want to dive in here because we've got a lot of territory to cover and we don't need to bore you with all of the details of our CV. My first order of business is, of course, we were supposed to be two moderators. We're supposed to be co-moderators, but our co-moderator, Alfonso Van Marsh, is in Israel. So we are going to start by giving him a call and getting him on Skype. So let's see if we can do that. And he should be wearing a flak jacket and a helmet here. Alfonso.
Hello.
Now, Alfonso, where is your flak jacket?
Sorry, flak jacket is getting dry cleaned, but we're here.
Okay, because it looks like you might be in Miami Beach right now. I'm not sure.
Don't tell my bosses.
So we've got Alfonso on the line, and why don't we, since we've got you handy, why don't we go ahead and just dive right in here and get started. Thank you so much for taking time. We know you are, unfortunately for us, fortunately perhaps for you, you are in Israel. You are covering the conflict. You're on the front lines. But let's take a brief step back and talk to us about where you were before Israel. How did you get to CNN? How did you get to Afghanistan? How did you begin your life as an international journalist?
Sure. I think I've had a really lucky path to getting my dream job now with networks. And I think what a lot of folks that might be attending today need to know is that you don't have to be a millionaire or ask daddy to write you a check in order to pursue an international journalism career. I was really lucky. When I finished studying, for me, I decided that my path was not going to be in television, going from local market to local market to local market. I was very focused. I knew that I wanted to cover international news. And luckily for me, I was able to find out about a fellowship that afforded me the opportunity to go to the Middle East. Now, at that time, I knew very little about the Middle East. I applied for the fellowship. I remember events of the Middle East and having an interest in it. And once I got that fellowship, that was an all-expense paid trip to intern at an English language television station in Egypt. As it turns out, the television station internship didn't work out, but the organization put me in a magazine, an English language magazine. The plan was to stay for 3 months. I wound up staying 4 years. And what I want to impress upon folks is once I had that first fellowship, which led to me freelancing, and then from there I started freelancing for CNN amongst other media and print outlets, finally got a job full-time, and that just kept going step by step by step by step up in my career. We've put together a really impressive list of internships and fellowships for people to check out. I was just going over a couple of them that I've done myself, that many of our panelists have done or will do. after I had my first fellowship going to the Middle East, I applied for another one called the Manfred Warner Seminar, which targets young journalists and other professionals who want to learn more about U.S.-German relations. I felt like I knew enough about the Middle East.
Modern technology. We're losing you a little bit there, Alfonso. Are you still there?
Missiles coming in.
Internet connection
Takes
problem.
people to Latin America or the Caribbean.
We got you back, I
We've
think.
got, important to note, deadline September 2nd, the International Reporting Project, which is offering reporters a trip to Mozambique. They're focusing on new media reporters, and that's new media journalists, freelancers, bloggers.
Okay. So
media
Alfonso, I'm
professionals.
just going to interrupt you for a second here,
Yeah.
because we are definitely going to cover all of that as well. But I think one of the things that I'm hearing from you is that you had this passion for international reporting, and you started, with a fellowship, and then that led to a bunch of things that you hadn't planned. Is that sort of a fair assessment?
Yes, that's a fair assessment. I knew that I wanted to pursue international reporting, and I just had to find the vehicle to get there. And I found that once I did one or two trips, that kind of gave me the foundation that I could build and build and build. For example, when I was at CNN, because I had done the freelance work through that first fellowship, I was able to convince them to allow me to go back out in the field again across Africa, and then again and again and again. And eventually I wound up being in a place, in this instance at CNN, being in Iraq as a one-man band reporter. And because I had had that international experience, I was able to get a really big break and was able to kind of go back to CNN and say, I think I really need a full-time job as a full-time correspondent. And I got it. And again, from that experience led me to my current experience, being based in London with CBS.
All right, so right now we're looking at your Twitter feed. I hope you scrubbed it well. You can follow Alfonso at AlfonsoVM. And who's sitting right next to me, who works for the LA Times. You've been in Russia, Kenya, South Africa, Bosnia, Haiti, Iraq. How did you get your start? What were you, when you were a young journalist, thinking about?
Still am young, excuse me.
Young, pardon me, younger journalist. What were some of the things, looking back now, what were some of the things on a foundational level that, looking back, you find were really important for you when you were starting out in your international career?
I think similar to Alfonso, I was really also very focused about wanting to become a foreign correspondent. And for me, I was born and raised in England and went to school in London. And so for me, the key was learning foreign languages, because I knew that that would always give me an edge. And if I wanted to go somewhere, people would say, it's often time that editors would ask, well, do you know the language? Will you need a translator? And if you can say no, that's, that kind of puts you ahead of the game. So I always stress that learning a foreign language is one of the key steps to becoming an international reporter. Also, if you're not lucky enough to win a fellowship, I would always suggest that go somewhere, go to a place that you're interested in on a holiday even for 1 week, so that you can then turn around and tell an editor, well, I've been to Spain, even though it's for a week, you've been to Spain. You can say that you've been outside of your particular, comfort zone. And, if I'd go on a holiday, and it was a lot easier, obviously, growing up in Europe, to get to the continent, to the European continent, and to travel. But if I would go to a place, I would just think about one story idea that, possibly I could come back and pitch to an editor. Also, I always suggest that you try and find an idea that relates back to the community in which you live. For example, obviously, large cities in the United States have very ethnically diverse communities. Take Los Angeles, for example, where I am based. There's a large Russian-speaking community in West Hollywood. So there are stories that I can pitch that have to do with the Russian-speaking community as a hook to say, well, I want to go to the former Soviet Republic of Georgia because there are Georgians in my area, and here are a couple of story ideas that I have.
Let me interrupt you and bring in Jackie Charles, who's working at the Miami Herald, an award-winning journalist for her coverage in Haiti. We were talking a little bit earlier about exactly this challenge or this issue, bringing international stories local and making local stories international. Can you talk a little bit about your experience at the Miami Herald and covering the Haitian community there, as well as covering Haiti, covering the earthquake? Can you talk about that process and how that's worked for you?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I'll have to say that I'm blessed by is the fact that for us at the Miami Herald, Haiti, Cuba, Latin America, these are local stories for us. We treat them as local stories. And so we invest in them. And so getting these stories, often the issue is where does the story play as opposed to whether or not they're going to get the story. But you're always looking to bring that story back home, and how do you do it? And if I just think of a few examples recently, for instance, we had the Jamaica Prime Minister who was visiting South Florida to give a commemoration address at a university, an online university where she had gotten some degree. And in this visit, she was not going to have a town hall meeting with the local community. And so I said, wow, that's interesting, because usually they do. So I used the fact that she was not going to meet with the local community to do, which was really an international story that I would have done in Jamaica, had I traveled to Jamaica. And it was about the fact that since her election, her handlers had basically been keeping her away from the media, and they had been keeping her away from public events. Everything had been very orchestrated, and it was a very political story about the leader of this Caribbean country, but I used the hook was the fact that she was not meeting with the local community. So that became part of the nut graph to talk about a political story. I mean, and the Jamaicans were so upset by this that weekend I was supposed to go to a couple of events and I decided not to. I really did not feel safe. They just made like the news in Jamaica, both television and radio news, it was like the leading story. Last week, the same thing I did with the Haitian community. The Haitian Prime Minister decided to have a town hall meeting. He brought in more than a dozen members of his government, and the president surprised everybody and showed up and literally danced and sang at this event. And that picture was our front page display story on our local section. And I just basically did an on-the-spot news story about the visit. But then I came back a couple of days later and I did again a political story about how the prime minister was really campaigning for the presidency of Haiti, which is 2 years away, using Hillary Clinton's same MO. And I had been in Haiti a week before, so I used examples from Haiti as well as what had happened in South Florida with all of these different meetings. Again, using local events to elevate your story. And this is what I say to reporters all the time. If you're interested, this is how I was able to make that transition, by finding local stories that are of interest to our readers, locally, and then finding the angle back home where you either pitch a trip back home to that particular country, or you bring that country there to you locally.
And just as a quick plug, we have Emily here from ICFJ, and they have a great fellowship that's designed. Do you want to?
Exactly. I did this fellowship. As one quick example, this story, Tassan Shin, I did a story from my desk in Miami. This was the Jamaican singer who won The Voice. And I used her winning The Voice, an example, to do a story about how in Jamaica they were getting on social media, and how even though Jamaicans couldn't vote, they found a way around the rules to vote by using Skype, by using other things. So
it was a scandal.
And they won, and she won, So again, it was more than a story about this Jamaican artist who stunned everybody, but it became a social media story. And yes, last year I did a fellowship because, you want to break up the monotony. I cover Haiti and the English-speaking Caribbean, which is like 20-some countries, but I'm also interested in Africa. I'm interested in international news. So I applied for a fellowship, and I went to Kenya. And Kenya was not my first country of choice.
And which fellowship was that?
This was the ICFJ, International Center for Reporting Fellowship. And I wanted to go to Nigeria because I've always been interested in West Africa, but I got Kenya. It was my first time in East Africa. It was 2 weeks, and it was great. I pitched a couple of stories off there. Now, the interesting thing, one of the stories I did was about poaching, and it was about how they were using sniffer dogs, similar to what we use in the drug fight, to deal with the poaching. And my battle when I came back, I had an editor who said, well, that's so far away. I said, yes, but it's wildlife. People are interested in this stuff. And we kept going back and forth. There was never a rejection of the story, but it became, where should the story play? Should it be a front page story, or where should it be inside in the world? Well, they put the story in a special section called Issues and Ideas, and I was very upset by it. Chelsea Clinton saw the story, tweeted the story out, and in a matter of like just 2 hours or something, the story got over 6,000 hits. Facebook likes, and I just for a week I walked around the newsroom. I was like, "Did you see that? Did you see that?" They're like, "You sound bitter, really?"
So I think Jackie's story is really illustrative of the struggle that we face. Well, not me because I'm a freelancer, but I face a similar struggle of convincing people, even if you have a fellowship. Well, do we have space to run it? Will our audience relate to it? Actually, Anne is going to be doing the same fellowship in a week?
In a couple of weeks, I'm actually off to Russia, which is one of my old stomping grounds. I'm a recipient of a social justice reporting fellowship from the same organization. So I'll be going to Russia to, in fact, report some stories on the African diaspora there.
So, Eugenia, you have been a senior producer, an executive producer at most of the major American networks. You're now director of programming at Arise TV, a great new network. You have the boss's perspective. You have maybe the more, 10,000-foot level. What do you think about when you're thinking about international coverage, when young journalists or mid-career journalists are coming to you and they're wanting to do international reporting? What's your perspective? How can they be successful when they're pitching a story to you?
Pitch a great story. It's really simple. Just a teeny bit about my background, why I'm here on this panel, is also because I have done a little bit of global reporting, just in Haiti and in Egypt, but and not nearly as much as my esteemed colleagues here. But it's all about the pitch of the story. If you have infinite curiosity, and if you are fearless in what you want, the stories that you want to tell, and if you're committed to the story and how you want to tell it, then you have my attention. And I will try to find the resources to make it happen. But if you don't believe in that story, if you can't tell that story to me, if you're not willing to put the feet and the energy and your own personal resources into telling the story, then it doesn't travel very far.
Can you give us an example in your work as a manager, or maybe even your personal work of one of those stories where either you pitched it or you got it pitched, and the amount of work and sort of research and back and forth and shaping it even after the pitch that happened?
Well, when I was in Egypt, I was brought in actually to do a documentary that Alfonso was working on. And by the way, part 2 of this is network. Network. People in this room get to know them. Yeah. But Alfonso and I happen to have been working together at CNN, and we were both gone by then. He was living in Egypt, and he had been asked to produce a documentary. And he told the directors of this particular network in Egypt, I can't do anything more than 5 minutes. He said, I need a long-form person to come in here and to work on this particular story. So I didn't know anything about Egypt other than, what was in the Bible and
maybe the 10 Commandments.
I mean, I was over there looking for Charlton Heston. No, no, I knew a little bit more, but going over there, as an American journalist who had to, really bone up and study this documentary on this person, Amr Khalid, who was a leader in Egypt. And so I literally just put my grad school hat back on, and for 6 weeks, studied and read and studied and read and, researched and looked up everything I could and, bought a Rosetta Stone. I mean, you just have to immerse yourself into the story and into the culture. And it did nothing to prepare me, by the way. By the time I got there,
But did you feel better when you got on the plane?
Well, I felt like I was doing something.
Right.
You had to have, I had to be able to go in knowing what the story was.
And
So,
I think that's an important thing. I think whether it's our first reporting trip or our 15th reporting trip, there's often an element of uncertainty when you're going somewhere for the first time, when you've never been there. Maybe you don't speak the language. And that's something that a lot of people get scared off from doing international reporting because they feel like they're not prepared. And I think we can all on the panel, and I'm sure some of you in the room, can say that there is no maximum amount of preparation you can do. You're always, no matter how well prepared, the first time you go somewhere, you're going to be a little uncertain. Alfonso, you are in the middle of the biggest story right now. You've spent time in the area, spent time in the region. Going back there for this story, what did you do to prepare? What did you do anything differently? Are there lessons from previous trips that you learned that really informed you in terms of working in the field?
Well, I think on this particular story, it's just the extreme sensitivity, not just a global audience, but particularly an American audience has to this whole Middle East conflict. And just really trying to keep in mind and trying to be conscious, even at the same level as other stories, but being aware you're going to get a reaction, to be sure you're as fair as possible in reporting both sides of the story. So what's been important this time around is just being sure that we're taking the time to show what's going on literally on both sides of the border. Most of my time, I've been more in the Arab world. This is actually my first time being in Tel Aviv, and trying to understand and get a feel for how, as many Israelis will tell me and tell me on a daily basis, that the world doesn't understand their side of the story. And of course, at the same time, I feel lucky to be at the network that really spends the resources to tell all sides of the story. I'm here in Tel Aviv going back and forth from the border. There's another correspondent also working along the Israeli-Gaza border, and there's another correspondent who's in Gaza. And I don't think a lot of networks can consistently say that they spend that amount of resources and staff telling international news. And I feel really, really lucky to be at a network that believes in international news.
We've got, Alfonso and I, when we were putting together this panel, we were very conscious to pick 3 talented, extraordinary female journalists. And there are a lot of female journalists, young journalists and mid-career journalists in the room. Can you guys talk a little bit about some of the, perhaps some of the unique challenges or concerns or experiences you guys have had as being female journalists and female journalists of color in the field, and perhaps allay some of the incipient fears that have been expressed to me by some of the people in the room? Just give us a little bit of, how you felt before you went to, Russia, and then the reality on the ground, and how you're...
All the fears are true. No, just
that's not what we rehearsed.
I think what you've got, first and foremost, you've got to really want to do this job. You've got to really want to put yourself sometimes in harm's way, or go into situations where there is a possibility that you may well be in a conflict zone. So that's number one. You've also got to know that in some parts of the world, they are more chauvinist than in others. For example, I would say that in Mogadishu in Somalia, I became an honorary man because I was allowed to sit at the table with other men, and whereas Somali women had to sit at another table, and because I was a foreign female. In Russia, they're extremely chauvinistic as well, that they would, sometimes back in the old days, it would be like, well, we're talking about, nuclear disarmament. Oh, she's just a girl. Sorry, you can let her in. So, that kind of worked to my advantage. In Africa, I would say that because I'm a sister, it was sometimes challenging to go into a room and, with some politicians and say, look, first and foremost, I am a journalist representing whichever medium. And yes, I'm also a sister. I'm black and I'm proud. But I've got to, I'm here to do a particular job because sometimes there were unwanted advances. And I'm sure that you've experienced the same thing.
So, can you give us a little? You've been working in Haiti for a long time, and it's a challenging environment, or can be a challenging.
Yeah,
environment.
I'm from the Caribbean. I was born in Turks and Caicos, and I'm Haitian, and I grew up with a Cuban stepfather. So this stuff is not foreign to me. But I also grew up in the U.S. And I'm like this, women's rights and, and all of this. And that's been the biggest thing where I had to learn to kind of set that aside and just bite my tongue. For instance, I cover these meetings with these Caribbean leaders and their CARICOM, prime ministers of countries. And 15 of them, and most of them are male. And, I remember interviewing a prime minister, and he's looking down at me. I'm like, PM, here's my tape recorder, and then you have your colleagues who actually think, being dressed inappropriately or some way is going to get them the story. So there's always a struggle. But at the end of the day, one, you have to say, you have to demand respect. You have to draw that line in a very respectful way. But at the same time, when you go into these areas, you also have to kind of recognize the culture and not take offense. It's a fine, balancing act. Even just in basic Miami, as an example, in the Hispanic community, the greeting is not with a handshake. It's a kiss on the cheek. That's what people do. And we've had debates in our newsroom. Well, should you be, kissing this politician on the cheek if you have to cover them? But culturally, it's appropriate. So I think you always have to be that. But first and foremost, I would say you have to listen to your instincts. In any of these situations, especially if you're a female, in terms of your security, you have to listen to your instincts. Also, yes, we are competing against each other. Everybody wants a scoop. But when you're in a conflict situation, with reporters, what happens is that you all have to team up together. So if you're going to go into an area and we decide we're going to do a caravan, we're going to go in, that's what you decide. That's how you do it. That's your team that you have to rely on. Just a couple of weeks ago, me and some colleagues of mine, we were in Haiti, and one of my colleagues, all of us have had different conflicts at different times with people in power. And we decided among ourselves, okay, if one of us cannot get into the palace, none of us are going into the palace for a press conference. It seems minor and it seems basic, but these are the things where you build the trust and the confidence against each other, especially if you're working in a place that's volatile and the next day you hear that this place is blowing up, but you all need to go in as a team in order to try to get out rather than to go in by yourself.
Anne, please.
I just want to add that, when I was in the Middle East, I don't know how to say this well. I was, I know a lot of words too. But the men there were overtly sexual and inappropriate, and to the point of exposing themselves, in public to me. And whereas in the States, I could, call the police or call my boss or call somebody and have some consequences, the response was along the lines of, well, you should just stay in. And it was very, very frightening, only because there was no repercussion. I didn't think, I could take him. I didn't feel really, really, really safe. And so it did impact my ability for a short term to be able to function and to do my job well. We eventually put in some safety measures so that I was never alone, and by the way, this was just going to work. This wasn't even I'm out someplace at night. This was just, you're here, you're an American, you're living in our building, you have an apartment here, you're here by yourself, let me show myself to you. I mean, it was like, it was a non sequitur. It just didn't make any sense. And as I told my story, I found out that I was not alone. So when the whole situation with Lara Logan happened, at CBS, when she was in Egypt during the revolution and she was, sexually assaulted, I was not surprised at all, because it's very, very real. So I would say that when you are traveling, especially if you're going into areas where they are, particularly, chauvinistic and unfortunately a little bit misogynistic, both, that you have built into either your contract or your terms or whatever, safety and security precautions, and that you don't flow outside of them despite your curiosity and despite
and I think this is a great example of reaching out to NABJ members, reaching out to task force members. Yeah. Talk to your colleagues who have been to these places. Yes. They will give you the lay of the land. They will give you experience. They will give you contacts of people on the ground, fixers, drivers, and they can give you a real sense so that you're not totally going in blind. I think one of the great things about this organization is that we have people not only all over the country, all over the world. So you can find an NABJ member. If they're not there now, they've been there in the recent past. And so I really encourage you guys to use your membership if you're thinking, even if you're just thinking about going someplace, so that you can get story ideas, but you can also really get a sense of what a place is like. This is a good opportunity to segue into a question that I think is really appropriate for this panel. Can you guys name one or two things that you know now that you had wished you knew then, whenever then is for you, whether it's, before your last reporting trip, before your first reporting trip, just some small piece of information or tactics that really for you, you're like, well, that makes total sense now, but that's sort of hard-won experiential information. Alfonso, do you have something like that? It could be a small thing.
Sure. I would say, I agree with you 100%. The concept of using NABJ as a resource and members as a resource. There were so many people in my early days where I was, and I'm sure so many people in the room can relate to this, where you feel like you got to do twice the job, 3 times the job, 4 times the job just to have the same opportunity as you see other people around you having. It was, I'm going to learn how to produce, learn how to shoot, learn how to edit, learn how to report, and somehow hope in the middle of Iraq, I can make this all come together. So many people at NABJ gave me some advice that I knew, and that's what the panel was saying. You have to believe your instincts, your gut, believe in the exact same things that you're doing currently. You're just in a different location. And just one other thing I wanted to add, as journalists of color, I think in many ways that kind of works to our advantage, whether in my particular case, most people tend to think that I'm Arab or half Arab, so I can walk down the street where the other journalists can't into neighborhoods or certain stories where I can with no problem. I find it interesting when I'm in the States, when people, and I go with a news crew, and people walk up to the producer, assuming they're the correspondent, and assuming I'm like the driver. So my point is, I hope I've answered your question, is that, the same instinct and drive that got you into this very room where you found the time and the money to get to NABJ, apply that same instinct for getting overseas, because it can happen. I'm proof that not even the smartest guy could make it.
Anne, can you?
Yeah, I actually agree. I agree with you, Alfonso, 100%. And I just wanted you touched on something really important about being a person of color in a place where you can often blend in. that can work to your advantage and to your disadvantage because it depends on how, kind of the people in that particular place view themselves, number one. And I'll give you an example, tall black woman. I could be from West Africa. My immediate roots are from the Caribbean. Of course, I'm from Africa. Don't know where, unfortunately. But for example, in Rwanda or in Burundi or Congo, where I was considered to be like a Banyamulenge Tutsi, that was sometimes a disadvantage, depending on, if heads were being chopped off, or an advantage if those people were in power at the time. They want to know, well, what family is she from? And I haven't seen her before. So it can, but if there's any kind of violence, oftentimes people aren't going to ask for your passport. They see another African in front of them, and it depends on if that African is favourable or not. There are big advantages. Speaking to African women, I found it was an advantage to be an African woman. A funny story, I was on a bus going from Nairobi to Arusha. And for some reason, I was taking the bus to the criminal court. I don't remember why. I didn't.
The subway was not. The metro wasn't running.
And I'm there, and the bus is packed, and people are sitting, and I'm sitting down, and suddenly got a baby in my lap. I'm like, what the hell do I do with this? Because the woman sitting next to me just thought, okay, she's a sister, she's got to know about babies, of course, another black woman, baby in the lap, and I'm like, what do I do with it? So that can be that. But then we struck up a conversation, and I found out, that she was going to be stopping off in one of the villages, and that there was another dynamic about there not being enough corn or sorghum or something. So in fact, the story came out of that little incident.
Always take the bus. That's the Eugenia.
Well, again, I actually right now I'm working for a Nigerian-owned company, and as an African American, we have a lot of cultural education, let's call it that happens on a regular basis. And a Nigerian Brit, actually. Yeah. Yes, and so it's very, very helpful to be able to understand, the history and culture. Again, you talk about your tips, how to survive and how to grow and how to meet those challenges. It's very helpful. I mean, I find myself constantly asking, my Nigerian colleagues, why is our boss so upset about this? Mm-hmm. And it's an issue of respect. Mm-hmm. He felt disrespected. I was simply disagreeing with him, right. And making my position known. But he felt, he might feel horribly disrespected because I'm younger and female. Mm-hmm. And so you have to learn how to navigate those waters. Again, not just in the case of a story, but in the case of having and maintaining and getting that next job. Because to your earlier point, I do want to say this. Our industry, our profession is growing so globally intertwined that for sure, I'm looking at all these, young faces here and some friends. And it's the truth. Even if today you're not in that situation, I guarantee you at some point in your career you will be. Mm-hmm. And so it's really important to know as much as you can about, whether it's Caribbean or African or, Afro-Caribbean, kinds of things, if you will, culturally, professionally, etc. Because I guarantee you, and let's meet in 20 years, God willing, and have this conversation, I dare say, that you will cross a path and it will impact your profession, your professional life.
Jackie, can you give us a little perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with Alfonso and what the rest of the panelists were saying. And when I think about my career and I think about NABJ, there are two incidents that, I've been to a lot of seminars, a lot of panels, and you don't really remember them, but there are two that I remember. One, actually, Ann was on. And I remember this, Audra Birch and I were both at this panel, and you were talking about your writing, and there was a line that you used, and I remember thinking, I've got to find a way to put that line in a story. But it was talking, but it was about how do you bring that story alive, to your readers. But one of the first panels was, I wasn't even doing foreign correspondence. I mean, I had done a trip right after out of college, but the panelists were talking about having those basic skills. And that's when you're in a foreign country, you have to rely on your basic reporting skills and just how to dig. There are no public records requests. People are not going to really give you information. Everybody's going to try to manipulate it to their advantage. And so those skills are very, very important. So when I see young reporters just out of college who say, the job that they're looking for is that they want to be an investigative reporter at, an international bureau. Okay, eventually, yes. But before you get there, there are a whole lot of things that you have to cover. And that brings me to, I think, the biggest issue for me is that safety. If you are not safe, you can't get the story. It doesn't matter. Your safety has to be first and foremost. And when you're a young reporter and you always want to sort of please your editors and you want to shine and you want to be a star, sometimes you may agree to do this or to do that just because you don't want them to think that you don't want to do it, but you have to do it. And if you're not comfortable with it, you have to say, I'm not comfortable. We need to find another way. I cover a country, and I have been blessed, and I thank God, that I haven't had to get on the back of a motorcycle and be rushed to the border in the middle of a conflict, because I've had colleagues where that has happened, or you're somewhere where you're literally being shot at or having a gun pointed at you. I did have a gun once, but that was, but you just have to really, don't be so anxious that you put everything else above your safety.
And I think this is a good segue, because everyone on this panel has either been in active conflict zones or post-conflict zones, in developing world countries, in very challenging places. That's not the whole extent of international reporting. You can be an international correspondent, you can do international stories and not get shot at. So let's we want you to be safe, we want you to be prepared, we absolutely want you to be realistic, but we also want you to broaden your horizons. You can do investigative pieces, you can do feature, you can do long form stuff that has nothing to do with war, that has nothing to do with violence, and that is also a part of what we do. And just as a quick segue, one of the things that we do as part of the task force is we have a website. We also have a Facebook page, so you can join our Facebook page. So type in NABJ Global on Facebook, and you can request a membership. But we have a wonderful webpage, which Rochelle Riley helped set up, and I help administer. And on it, we list a lot of things. It's kind of a blog page, and we list a lot of upcoming fellowships, grants, things like this. A lot of it comes from IJNet and other sources that we find. And one of the things that we've done just for this, if you look as we try to get Alfonso back from our connection, we have a link here on the upper part that says resources. And we recently created a page which now lists about 20 to 30 grants, fellowships, and internships, including some that have very recent deadlines. So you're maybe not going to apply for the Knight Prototype Fund unless you leave. You got like 15 minutes. But we have, and I put this list together along with Alfonso and some of the other panelists, and most of it is sort of internationally focused. There are some domestic ones, the Neiman, for example, but as Alfonso mentioned, there's this reporting trip to Mozambique. Reporting trips are a great way to get to know a country, to find stories. If you have an interest in East Africa or Mozambique, then you can apply for this trip from IRP. The Fund for Investigative Journalism has a deadline coming up. The Fulbright. I'm an alumni of the Fulbright. I went to Austria. There are a bunch of Fulbright-specific journalism fellowships, and they can last anywhere from a few weeks to a full academic year. I highly recommend. This is a new one, which is a digital storytelling fellowship, and the deadline's actually in October, so you have time to apply for it. We have links to the fellowship as well as usually a brief explanation to it. And the list sort of, it goes on. We have several from ICFJ. Emily, please raise your hand. She's a a bigwig and a program officer at ICFJ, and they run literally dozens of fellowships for journalists doing domestic work and international work. I did the Burns program I'm an alumni of. It's an exchange between Germany and the United States. I highly recommend it if you're interested in going to Europe or Germany, but there are several, including a community health reporting fellowship. It goes on and on. So go to NABJ Global, go to the top and go to resources, or the URL is here, and please check that out. We also have internships listed at the bottom, and at the very bottom we have a section of resources including IJNet and things around digital security and mobile security. So there's a lot of information on this webpage, and the webpage is really designed to be a living document. So over the course of the next year, we're going to be constantly updating it. And as part of that, if you go to the very bottom of the page, we've actually created a Google Calendar with deadlines. So if you use Google Calendars or iCal, you can type in this calendar ID here. I'm not going to read it out. It's on the page. You can find it. You can copy and paste it. But then you can see that calendar, and it has the deadlines. It also has a brief description of the fellowship and a direct link to the webpage. And we created that so that you guys can, really have access to that. Rochelle's got.
Yeah, before you leave that, and you're talking about resources.
Yep. Sorry.
Before he leaves that page and we're talking about resources, I just wanted to take a moment to say you can also consider covering global economies and issues like cars. And that is a great segue to make sure I introduce our sponsor for our forum today, General Motors. This is powered by General Motors. And if you want to cover the auto industry, you don't just live in Detroit, because the auto industry is global. So if Andrea Taylor could stand and receive our thanks. Thank you very much to General Motors for sponsoring our forum and our reception. So as you consider grants, fellowships, ways to get into this, think cars. And I'll give you back to Damaso.
Thank you so much, and really thank you to our sponsor. The food which will be here and the drinks which will be here are made possible by them, so we're deeply appreciative of that. And so we've got our NABJ Global Facebook page. We have got this resource page. We're on Twitter at NABJ Global, and you can follow us. There's a lot of information, but we've been doing a lot of talking, and I want to open up the floor to your questions for us. There are a lot of them. Great. So let's start right here. You? Yeah. Google Glass guy.
Google Glass.
Andrew.
Andrew Humphrey, WDIB in Detroit, Michigan, also founder of the Digital Journalism Task Force for NABJ. Speaking of social media and the links that you're talking about, what differences or what pluses or minuses have you noticed in reporting your stories or doing your news gathering using digital tools, social media, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, or anything else? Any stereotypes, like working in third world countries, any pluses or minuses, things of that sort?
Well,
I'm sorry. Could you hear that, Alfonso?
Yes,
Okay.
about using social media. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Great.
I could tell you, when I started my Twitter account, it was like, okay, so Twitter is this thing, you got to set up this account. I'm like, okay, yeah. And then I remember the first time, 2008, there were 4 back-to-back storms that hit Haiti in 30 days. And I started using Twitter to do my feeds. Like the idea was usually you would, send notes or call in so they can get a story online very quickly, and it becomes hard trying to multitask and still report. And I'll spare you the harsh details of the disaster, but I basically started writing, sending out tweets, but did it in a way that they could just pull the tweet and use the tweet to do an initial online story. And after the earthquake in 2010, before the earthquake, I probably had like 1,000, a couple of hundred followers. And today I have almost 25,000 followers on Twitter. And every day it's, people are following me, and it is because they are interested in the subject matter. I have the prime ministers, they tweet. I look at the Twitter because I find news, but I also don't want to scoop myself. And that's always the challenge, right? Your bosses want you to be on social media. So how do you, when you learn something, do you put it, do you tweet it, do you hold it? So if I'm not going to write about it in the next 10 minutes or something, I will try to hold it back. But I also do use it to promote my stories, and also in terms of retweeting some people. But it's changed,
She's got 24,000 followers on
plus,
Twitter.
You have to open it up to see. That's awesome.
Yes. Please use NABJ Global as your hashtag. Alfonso, social media. I would imagine covering this this current conflict in what looks like a New Jersey hotel room. I mean, from Israel, you must be getting a lot of engagement on social media.
Yes, and always looking for more, always asking people, I'm lucky that I do so many different kinds of stories. You never know what I'm covering, whether if it's a huge trampoline underground in Wales to the Middle East conflict.
I love that story.
At Alfonso VM. Alfonso VM, add me. But what's really interesting, and again, a cautionary tale, we've seen this so much, and particularly in this conflict, journalists, for whatever reason, who are expressing some experiences or opinions covering this particular conflict, have been in a heap of trouble, for right or for wrong. So, we learn from that and say, for me, I try to keep it to the facts. Occasionally, because it's such a serious story, I will try to find some lighter things to talk about. But at the same time, a lot of the information we're getting, this conflict is very much a social media conflict where both Palestinians and Israelis, whether they're government or everyday people, are using social media in a very, very savvy way to get their message out. And that's a huge tool for us to get to places where quite literally we're barred from going, where whether it's the military or safety concerns, we can't get to these areas. We're getting the message and sending out the message through social media. So it definitely makes a difference.
That's really interesting. You guys have something to add?
I want to say something. I'm going to put my boss hat on for a second.
Well, listen to her, because you might be asking her for a job or getting fired by her if you don't listen to her. So.
No, this is. I'm putting my boss hat on for a moment now. Just remember, the moment you tweet or go on Facebook, you are no longer a private person.
No.
If you are a journalist, the moment, and I'm just totally underscoring what you're saying, Jackie, but the moment you go on, you are no longer a private person, because anything that you say, whether it's in jest, whether it's out of the depths of your heart, whether you're having a moment, or whether you are, just absolutely exasperated, you have to temper it. You put that in your diary.
If you don't believe us,
try to avoid personal comments, personal observations, because it's just so easy to get in trouble. And honestly, do people want to know about, what happened to you at the restaurant or on the flight, or it's just.
Yeah, look up hashtag has Justine landed yet. And if you're not familiar with that, this was a director of public relations at a Fortune 500 company. So let's take another question, because we want to try to get as many in. Speak loudly.
My name's Meredith. I'm a sophomore at American University.
She's a sophomore at American University.
My goal is to also go into international news, and I want to focus on the continent of Africa. And since I'm going to DC, and I know that it's the center for international news, what can I do right now to start preparing myself so when I get to the workforce, I'm already up there. What can I do to maximize my experience right now? So I'm just eager to go.
I'm gonna take off my moderator hat and just add a little something. I personally think that journalists need to be interesting people. You need to know about things other than journalism. You need to, study history. clearly study current affairs, but take a broad approach to your formal education and then to your informal education. If you're going to be a journalist, you need to love reading. I personally think you need to read and devour everything, because it's amazing how something which seems completely unrelated to anything that could possibly be useful, then a few months or weeks or days or years later becomes, oh wow, I know about this and I can link these two things together. That's just my
No, and that's
2
where
cents.
interesting stories come from. I mean, your mind is just always thinking. I mean, that's what makes it interesting. Is that you're like, oh, I wonder what if, and then you bring these two things that may seem totally unrelated together, and you come out with this just really great enterprise story. But you have to be open and you have to be interesting, in order to get there.
I quite agree. Every single thing is a story. I mean, every day of the week, whether or not I'm working or not, I'm thinking stories. If I have a conversation with someone, I am concentrating on what you're saying, don't worry.
That a
But I'm
story?
also
She's
thinking,
multitasking.
is there something else there that possibly could lead to a story? Also, if you've got the opportunity to travel at all, have you been to Africa already, to visit it at all? You have, so that's already an advantage that you're at. But yeah, it's definitely worth trying to maybe go back or go to a place that you haven't been on the continent to visit there.
Because see, every story that you pitch, somebody has either already pitched it or done it. What's going to distinguish your story from the previous story is the angle that you take. And that's what you're always striving for, to tell this yet untold angle, untold story of a very common story, narrative.
Alfonso?
Reading. No, I'm just kidding. Yes.
Don't read. Alfonso
I'm just
says
fitting
don't
the
read.
television stereotype. But for me to go on, it's about. I try to think of myself as kind of the guy you want to sit next to at the dinner party, and apply that same kind of storytelling to how I do my reporting. Now, for some people it's whimsical, for other people it's casual, but for me it is telling you something that's important, just as you would with your friends or with your peers or with your colleagues in an office. And it doesn't matter if it's a huge international story or a local story. I mean, I always try to think, if I were learning about something, do I want somebody to say, hi, well, in Tel Aviv today, 15 people died? I mean, who talks like that in real life? I certainly don't. So to answer the question is personality, being yourself, being well-read, being a Renaissance kind of person, and most important, just be willing to take that chance. Be willing to get on that plane and be willing to tell a good story and just have the faith that it's going to work out. You are looking at, myself excluded, some really, really impressive journalists and people who I know personally and am so excited and feel so privileged to know. Talk to them, be inspired by them, and just go out and make it happen, because we've done it, you can do it.
Yeah, I mean, I just very briefly, when I was 21, right after college, I bought a one-way ticket to Jakarta and had $400 in my pocket. I ended up staying for a year and a half and freelancing for the Far Eastern Economic Review and Time Asia. A lot of times we start out with a desire, but not necessarily a fully fledged plan. That's not for everybody, but sometimes you have to get on a plane. Sometimes you have to take that chance on yourself. All the way back. Speak very loudly.
My name is Tanya Francois. I work for WPC in West Palm Beach, Florida. My boss recently gave me the okay. I go to Haiti once a year to visit my dad, and I did it last year. Now, more formally, I get to take a camera and tell a story. Jackie, last year it was kind of fun. I got to turn some packages, and it's like whatever we saw. I now have a focus. Without spilling my story.
We will steal
to
Are you going to Cuba?
We're going to Port-au-Prince.
Uh-huh.
My dad has thrown out the idea of how about we just go to Havana from Port-au-Prince for a couple days and then come back to have a whole week. And so I'm like,
Is that part of your story?
it's not, but
Okay.
like I
Well, I've been to Cuba. I don't know, have you guys been to Cuba? There are legal ways for journalists to go to Cuba. You can apply for a permission from the Treasury Department. You can do that formally. You can go informally, and some of the people in this room
don't
probably
tweet that.
probably have done. You can. I am not recommending
Well, I
that
work
you do
in a
that.
newspaper that is not allowed.
If the
Okay.
NSA is listening,
Yeah.
I did not tell her to do that. But realize if you do something informally that there can be
Consequences.
repercussions. So if you want to do it, why not sort of do it properly so that you have that peace of mind? At the same time, I would say
Well,
know what your story is.
I work for a news organization that is not allowed entry into Cuba. And it's no secret that we, over the years, have had reporters into Cuba, but we tell our readers that we are withholding the name of this reporter because for the protection of that reporter's safety. One of my colleagues recently got a visa to Cuba. It was like the first time in over a decade that a Herald journalist had been allowed, and it was during the Pope's visit. But I think first and foremost, you need to have a focus. If you're going to tell a story like the immigration story and off of what's happening, the story is not in Haiti, the story is not in Cuba, the story is in Central America. The story is at the Mexican border, okay? Or the story is locally. It's a child welfare story. There are so many other things you can do with that story. But you have to, it's like you're looking at this road and you're saying, I want to be here, but you have to know where here is. And then, one of the things that I do on every trip before I go is I start to gather strings. I mean, I look at what's been written about the subject area, AP, Reuters, what the wires have said. I talk to people. I do a lot of pre-reporting before I go on a trip. And then when I go on that trip and I start to do reporting on the ground, I'm not so glued into this story I think what it is. I allow the interview to also lead me to what this story actually is. Because if you go in with this idea of this is going to be the story, then you will miss out on the better story. But we talk about preparation, first of all, you need to know where you're going to stay, who's going to pick you up, and how you're going to get from the airport. Those are like the most basic things you need to know. And then you have your research information. But it's the same way that you would approach any story in your newsroom. Ultimately, what do you want from the story? What is sort of the impact? And then you take it from there. If you go into Cuba, that's a completely different story. Also with your audience, is that the story that's going to resonate, with your audience?
My boss, like last year, it was just carte blanche. Take a camera and come back with whatever you come back with. And I found 2 great stories. It was wonderful. This year, my boss, he suggested immigration and earthquake recovery.
I have a story for you. We'll talk afterwards. I'm generous. I'll give you a story.
How about right there? Yep.
Hi, my name is Carrie Freeland. I'm a graduate student at Kennedy Journalism School. I'll be finishing in December 2014, and I'm planning to move to Brazil for 2 years to basically, obviously report from Brazil leading up to the Olympics and through the Olympic and Paralympic Games. But I want to move to Brazil, and I want to make a living. I want to pay off my credit card debt, and I want to pay off my school loans.
That's very ambitious. Maybe you should be an investment banker.
You want a lot. You want a lot to be a journalist.
To be a freelance journalist in Brazil.
Do you have a rich husband or wife
Or dad.
or dad?
Trust funds. I have a significant video background, so I'm coming at this from a very multimedia perspective. And I'm currently strategizing on how I can make this happen. Could you give me just some suggestions and tips on how I could make those first 3 or 4 months work financially?
Well,
Do you speak Portuguese?
So just to fill Alfonso in, we have a journalist who's a soon-to-be graduate. She's planning on moving to Brazil. She wants to freelance and
Pay off her debt.
pay off her debt while she's doing that,
I
which
actually-
sounds counterintuitive to me, mate.
no, it's not. It's not at all.
If I can take a crack at that, I think one of the things that I would recommend is that you notify as many potentially interested media outlets as possible. You should let, us at Arise know that. You should let as many, newspaper and television and digital outlets know as possible that you're going to be doing this, because you just never know. I mean, stories are going to be coming up throughout that time, and having somebody already in place there, means a lot to somebody like, me and my company, where, it's like, wow, it's great, this person's already there.
And if I could touch up.
Hold on, Alfonso, you want to jump in there?
Yes, thank you. Eugenia is 100% right. When I took that fellowship that got me to Egypt, I knew I was going to be, I eventually was at a magazine, but I knew I wanted to stay, and I knew that I had also interned at CNN, but I also knew that I wanted to eat. So by the time I left, after 4 years, I had probably about 26, 28 freelance strings. And what I found, and I want people to not be discouraged by this, is when I called up, say, People magazine, or I called up travel magazines and said, I'm moving to Egypt, I want to write for you, I want to do TV for you, not a lot of people were as interested in engaging with that, because they probably thought, I was young, I had these dreams, it wouldn't happen. But once I was in place, and once I was able to pitch competent stories, or once something happened in the region that was of interest to these freelance agents, it started coming in. I mean, and it was from the most simple, with apologies to the freelance people I'm about to mention, the most simple things like doing hotel tourism magazines like Sheraton Hotel Magazine, Hilton Hotel Magazines, to writing for travel
Airline
agencies,
magazines,
airline
in-flight
magazines. All of these things, it all adds up, and you will go from vegetables to vegetables and rice to vegetables, rice, and chicken, vegetables, rice, and chicken. So it can happen, but I agree with you. It's hard to take that leap of faith, not knowing, how you're going to get home if something bad happens, or how are you going to eat. But again, these fellowships and internships that we've put together for you are an excellent resource. There are over 30 different fellowships alone. Check it out.
Especially when you're first getting somewhere. So if you want to go somewhere, if you can line up a fellowship or a grant, that can ease your way, that can pay your bills for the first few months. But I think one of the first keys, keep your overhead low.
Yes.
Super low. And one of the great things about student loans is you can defer payment on them if your income is below a certain level for a certain amount of time. So I know you want to pay off those loans quickly, but it may take you a little while to get on your feet. And you had to quit.
And I can tell you, just because you moved to Africa, the student loan people will find you.
Yeah, they will find you. So. Although Brazil has no extradition treaty, so that's a plus.
Just really quickly, again, just in terms of having the organizations lined up, maybe have a couple of specific story ideas lined up that you can already tell them, I'm going to Brazil and I can pitch you this even before you go. So.
Yeah. All right, how about you?
Hi, my name is Ajure Chumba. I am a West African correspondent for E-News Channel Africa, which is in South Africa, and I cover West Africa from Lagos. I have two things. First is a contribution to what you guys have been saying, which many people don't know, I guess they don't think about it. But how I got my break was actually moving to Nigeria and working for a local station there. So they paid my bills, and I frolicked with the international agencies. I guess I'm a success story to that. And I listened to all you guys have said at past NABJs, and I put all that into action. Now here's the second part of my question. So now I've done all of that stuff. I've realized it's actually challenging playing with the big boys when you're not really with an equal player. So the issue that I'm experiencing now is I want some stability and I want competition as well, because there are not that many like awards or like everybody's just reporting this stuff and nobody cares. Like just report this stuff, and maybe only the American I've got this experience, and it can actually work, if applied here in the U.S. I know it might sound a little
Okay.
different, but yeah.
Why don't you're
Your
hiring
boss.
people? You're giving out jobs. Give her a job.
The TV person. This is going to sound a little bit crazy, but you have to really focus on where you want to go. And then you have to plan your story and what you're putting out there for that audience.
Yeah.
And so if you want to, target, getting your work on Discovery, or you want to just target getting your work on ABC or CNN or Rise or anything like that, watch the programming and be able to, when you do eventually, because you seem like a very persistent person, so when you do eventually get to, a hiring manager, an HR person, or an executive producer, be able to demonstrate that you have that flexibility to do the kind of producing that they do. It's very microcosmic. And, it's just like anything else. You have to, if you want to write for the Times, you write for, you
write their way.
You write their way. If you want to write for the LA Times, you write their way. And you have to do that for television as well. You have to show them that you can do it.
Let's keep things moving. We have a lot of questions. The great thing is we do have a reception afterwards, so you can buttonhole us. I hope that you engage with us. We will all be here for the reception afterwards. How about you? Yep, black and white dress.
Hi, I'm Amy McAleen. I have a question. I work as a morning reporter in Richmond, Virginia, and I'm interested in making the transition from local news to international reporting. And I'm not really sure if freelancing is the way to go, or if I can do the correspondent route, or the best way to finesse that transition. So if you have any advice.
So making the transition between local and international. One question that I would have is, what's your time frame and how poor are you willing to be? No, seriously.
That is the question.
I've been, and that's a little rhetorical, so think on it, but I've only been a freelancer. So for the last 15 years, I've done all of my international work, from Indonesia to Rwanda to Europe, as a freelancer. And I've gotten to go places, I've gotten to work on stories that I know for a fact I couldn't do as a staff journalist. Not just because they wouldn't send me there, but they might not send me there for that length of time. At the same time, I have very low overhead, I have no children. So there's a balance there depending on whether or not you crave stability, you need that biweekly paycheck. It might be a little more challenging, but why don't we talk to some of the people who've taken that staff route and done that one?
Someone in the audience, actually, Greg.
Greg
who's
Branch.
Actually, a great example of someone, actually, if you don't mind.
Oh, please.
Greg Branch is here.
Contribution.
Yes, Greg is here.
Because that's exactly what you're
Greg
doing
says
now,
hello.
or have done, and you've been extremely successful at it. So, do you want to make a...
I mean, to answer your question, I think obviously the money is a big issue. I sort of did what people were talking about. I actually had a professional career in foreign news. I was working at CBS, and I was the UK news manager for the CBS News Foreign Desk. So I had that sort of, that system that Alfonso was talking about. I worked for the same network he's working for now. It was very dedicated towards foreign news. But I wanted to tell different, better, more interesting stories, and stories that related to people who look more like me. And that wasn't going to happen where I was at CBS. So I kept jumping around to try and get someone to finance that. I didn't. So eventually I packed up everything, jumped on the plane, and I moved to East Africa with nothing, except that I did go around to the networks and tell them, look, I'm going to go to Uganda, I'm based in Kampala, but I'll have access to travel around the East African region. I've been to Africa several times, I'm familiar with it. There's some stories which I can cover for you. Would you be interested? Some said yes, some said no, some said we'll get back to you. And others said, well, call us when you get there. Right, I'm going to call you from Kampala. But as Alfonso said, where you are, stories happen all the time. One of the stories that was the bane of my existence in Kampala, what probably paid me the most money that I've ever made as a freelance journalist, was the anti-homosexuality bill. Because once that story made global news, everybody said, oh, is there a guy that's in Uganda? Yeah, I got Greg Branch, let's call him. And every other day I was getting 4, 5, 6, 7 calls, to do the same story. The issue for me was not to do the same story for each network the same way, and to make sure that I spoke in the language that network was looking to reach.
That's
and
true.
I diversified
Anne, do you have? Uh, go ahead. Or Eugenia?
Yeah, I was going to say that.
Great Rolodex of contacts because I lived in East Africa 5 years. So, and people also, they either want to mine my contacts or pay me for it.
He also saved a lot of money before he went, and I'm the practical one. So he sold everything he had,
Yeah.
and he was able to. I mean, you have to plan it just like that. Like you literally have to say, I can survive without working for X amount. And it's really important to do that when you get this romanticized notion about just moving away. You have to do that.
And again, not to sort of belabor the point, but I think everyone on the panel has done a fellowship or gotten a grant. So if you're thinking of making a transition and you can work it out with your newsroom to take 3 weeks or 3 months off or 6 months off, that can be a really great way to get to the place that you want to go, get some experience on the ground, get some clips and some stories, and make some connections. Garrett?
Let me just add some quick. I have a friend of mine who's in Haiti, and she's a freelance journalist. I always say she's my sister from another mother, another country, Amélie Baron, and she works for Radio France International. And what she did is she's really a freelance reporter, but she has a steady contract with RFI to produce. So she already has that coming in, and then that allows her to do other things. But at the same time, when I go to Haiti, I ride around with a driver, and it's $150 US a day. She gets around on a motorcycle, or she gets public transportation. I mean, you have to be willing to keep that
Take the bus.
overhead very low. The bus,
Take the bus.
You take
I've
the bus.
taken the bus in Haiti. I've taken the bus
And
in
the
Rwanda.
and the trick to
Bus in Haiti.
freelancing, what Greg just mentioned also, is when you do that one story, you have to make that story sort of work. Rejigger it, redo this, redo that. So with that, because I'm going to be real, with freelance budgets, at least with newspapers, we really don't pay that much. So the way you really make it worth your time is you need to get other people to buy that same story, but you have to find different ways of telling that story.
We've got time for a couple more quick questions. Gary, Anthony.
If I
Stand up.
could just add to that really quick, please, though. I think we've hit some really good points. And just wanted to add really quickly.
Hold on, Gary.
repurposing
Alfonso
content
wants
is really, really important. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just saying that the idea of repurposing content is very important, as well as that remembering that the dynamic has completely changed, at least from a broadcast perspective. People used to think.
I think we're losing you, Alfonso. So let's, Gary, do you have a quick?
Video outlets like what Anne does. There's so many great outlets out there. Don't limit yourself to just the big.
All right, hold on, Alfonso. We kind of lost you there for a second, but let's move on quickly.
Was that like that? Sorry.
Is your station part of a larger company group, corporate group? Okay. What is the single largest foreign collection of immigrants in your do you know what that is? Well, then, if you don't know what that is, you should find out what that is. And I'll just quickly my example. The way I wanted to always do that myself when I was local in New York. So I started focusing on the Bosnian community and Yugoslavian community, and I wanted to do a whole segment on this conflict in Kosovo. But we had a whole community right here in New York. All right. So what I did is I pitched it to the corporation, and when the bombing started in Kosovo, I pitched it for the whole company. I'll go, you send me, and I'll file reports for all of you. And you all share the freight of the trip. And when the opportunity came, I was the first person that phone called because they already had that idea in front of them. So that's the way you can frame it. That's cost effective, and you get to do international reporting with the local stations. That's one way.
I think that's a great idea. We have time for one more question, and then we've got our reception, and you can ask us all many, many, many more questions.
Almost all of us.
Well, okay, not you, because, you're there, and you couldn't be here.
No chicken for you.
No chicken for you.
My name is Ayana Brickhouse. I'm with Al Jazeera English in DC. I'm a deputy news editor, and I deal with group of reporters who cover Latin America and North America.
So the question is how to deal with minders and government handlers.
So it's
Anne?
really kind of precarious. Yeah, and I think back
Hold
to
on,
the
Anne.
days
Yeah, go ahead. Anne.
in the former Soviet Union, where you couldn't go outside of Moscow, 40 kilometers outside of Moscow, without reporting to them that you were going. And then when you turn up, there would be someone like, if you go by train, waiting on the platform there for you. But it's really touchy. I mean, it's winning the confidence of that person, because oftentimes they are just they're government operators, obviously, agents, but they're people who are often also quite interested in where you're from and what you're doing. And I've always found that if I can get into a conversation with someone, win their confidence, just tell them about where I'm from, ask about their family, ask who they are, and try and win them over. And so that they are keeping an eye on you, but it doesn't become as kind of stringent or strict. So,
Alfonso, you wanted to jump in there?
Well, yes, because I've been in, as the other panelists have as well, I've been in a number of different situations where that's an advantage and a disadvantage. For example, an assignment right now, the Israeli authorities have no shortage of people, particularly that are willing to kind of keep track of your reporting. And yesterday we were at a hospital where a lot of injured Israeli soldiers are being taken for treatment. And during that whole time, while kind of presented as a facilitator, kind of help you get around to areas, it was definitely more of a monitoring kind of what are you saying, what's being discussed. On the flip side of that, and that was kind of maybe more of a neutral kind of thing. On the flip side, I remember a particular story when I was in Libya before their Arab Spring. And there, the minders, you can't leave the hotel without kind of their permission. And I'll try to keep the story short. You would get a call early in the morning saying, the great leader, in reference to Muammar Gaddafi, is ready to see you now. And so we'd all go downstairs, wait in the lobby for 4 hours, and the guy wouldn't show up. So American journalists, even though they were insisting.
We've come to the end of our time, but we do have a lovely reception with free food, and I think a cash bar. So come, stay, eat, please. We really thank you for coming. I want to give a big hand to our panelists, including Alfonso, all the way from Israel. Thank you so much. And thank you for making this a success.
And thanks once again to our, I'm sorry, Alfonso, you first.
Just say it. I was just saying I won't be able to make the reception myself, but happy to continue the conversation. Find me on Facebook, Alfonso Van Marsh-Media, or on Twitter, Alfonso VM.
I'll be flying into Newark, so I'll stop by in a little bit. Thank you so much from Israel, and thank you again to General Motors, which powered this forum and reception. We're going to hang out in the back with great food and drinks, and you can continue to ask questions. I'm so glad that Greg Branch is here. Please take advantage of the folks who are doing this, and some of us who only do it occasionally. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.